So I got a bunch of this wood, and they're all short pieces. Maybe the longest one's 2 foot. All the others are about this long, maybe a foot or so. Anyway, I don't know what it is. I think it's mesquite, but it's really beautiful. And as you can see, it has this really reddish brown tone. But when you cut it or plane it, sand it, it turns brown. So that's interesting, right? It's usually the opposite. So I'm assuming that when this patinas, it'll go back to this beautiful reddish brown color. Anyway, working on a little box, so this is the start of it. Gonna be fun. Here at my bandsaw, I want to slice a veneer off this board, and I need to preface by stating my bandsaw is set up to not have any blade drift. In other words, I use my fences parallel to the miter slot, and I'm not going to go into bandsaw blade drift here. There are lots of YouTube videos on how to correct it. So I've got a couple of drill bits. These are the size of the thickness of the veneer that I want, in this case 5/64, I believe, and I'm going to tape those to this tall auxiliary fence. The fence is just anchored down by a means of a couple of threaded knobs. I drilled and tapped holes in the cast iron table, and there's slots in the fence in the base, and it's adjustable so I can cut different thicknesses of veneer. And typically this is what you would do if you're cutting a taller board. You would use an auxiliary fence. And then I have this guy. This is my bandsaw setup jig. And so here you can see this cleat, or 2 cleats down at the bottom. It has a split between them to allow for that pin, that conical pin. And I'll clamp that in place. I have a mark, so I clear the ribs underneath the cast iron table, snap that in place, and then I can bring the fence up to it with the drill bits in place. And the drill bits space it the exact thickness of veneer that I want. In other words, the left side of this jig is in direct and exact alignment to the left side of the blade, including the teeth. So that's what I call 0 inches left of the blade. So any spacers that I put between the jig and the fence, that's exactly how thick of a piece I'm going to cut. I use this thing all the time. It works amazingly well. Perfect for veneers. I have a YouTube video on this. I'll leave a link in the description. Once that's tightened down, I remove the drill bits, remove the jig, and make the cut. I love this thing because it works so well. It works every time, extremely accurate. Yeah, drill bits as spacers, one of my all-time favorites. If you remember, I had used 2 5/64 drill bits, and check it out. Boom, 5/64. 1/64 over a 16th or 5/64. Perfect. I love it. So I have enough material here to get a bottom and, of course, the sides of the box. And look at that beautiful grain. Pretty cool looking species, whatever it is. I got it for a great price, but what really means a lot to me is that this belonged to another woodworker that was passionate about what he did. I absolutely love that. So I'm going to start on the box first, right? Then I can size the lid, of course. So this is the inside. You can see book matched. Now, unless you're making a square box, you don't want to just cut these. So I need 2 ends, and they're going to be shorter, and then the sides, or the long pieces, right? But you don't want to just cut that, because that won't give you a true index unless it was square. But since it's not square, one of these will cut here, and the other one will cut here. And then, of course, that'll make a corner. And these 2 pieces cut here will make a corner. Those will turn and make a corner, and then these will go end to end and also make a corner. It's not that great of a match there, but it's the best you can do when you're doing this kind of a end match. And then, of course, these would actually have to come out correct. But they're going to be dovetailed, so it's not like a miter. I mean, if it's a miter, it's going to have to be really close grain in order to make that complete match all the way around the perimeter. As I was editing the video, I noticed one of my boards was upside down, so in fact, it did come out with a perfect 4-corner match. So I've cut the height and I've lined up all the grain because sometimes it's running off at an angle, so you have to straighten it out first and then cut everything to width. But you can see, of course, that's matched. This one and that end one are matched. You can see the little triangle there. And these are matching and those are matching. So that's gonna look pretty cool, yeah? So I can cut these to size now, to length, and start cutting dovetails. Okay, to start, I use this 8-degree template, and I can angle the blade till it's perfectly 8 degrees or matches the template. This template will be the same one that I'll angle the miter gauge to cut the pins. This will all make more sense here in a bit. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I will leave a link in the description on a video that I made called Table Saw Dovetails. Rather than using a traditional marking gauge to scribe scratch, cross-grain scratch, I use a scribe, a pencil mark, and I'll talk more about that here in a bit. Once I have that pencil mark on one of my parts, I can transfer that to this jig and set the blade height. And a real key component to cutting dovetails with the table saw is using a stop block. Let me show you how this works. A squared up plywood board, some sandpaper on one side for better gription, and a clamp. So on this jig, that 1/4-inch strip at the bottom provides perfect reference, and of course the back prevents blowout. Yeah. All right, so I've got some spacers cut, and with those, I can, finish cutting these tails. Spacer there, then another one to cut this far one on the end. And I know a lot of people I've seen where they'll cut dovetails at the table saw, and when they go to make the other cuts, they move this stop, and that's fine. But I like leaving this here as a reference. You always want to cut some extra. This is a piece of walnut, so you can make test cuts. And even if I have to move this, I would take another one of these, clamp it here, then remove this. That way I never lose my actual reference. Just something I've always done, whether it's a router, table saw, chop saw, whatever you're working on. You set up a baseline of 0 so you can reference back to it if you need to. Here, if you look closely, you can see that little red Woodpecker brand spacer, so I can get that little bit at each end. So with that blade, 8-degree blade, and cutting these curves as narrow as possible, so those pins stay as narrow as possible, it leaves just a little whisper of material in there. You see that? And so I just cut that out with an 1/8-inch chisel, a good strong light, and I can just cut that out quick and easy. Once those are all cut, then we can mark the pins. There's lots of ways to do this. This is how I do it. Just barely snug it in the vise there. Grab your tail board and just push that down. Okay, snug that up. Yeah, and then got this funky little square, which is really just a piece of aluminum that I squared up. Super handy for stuff like this. This guy goes here, and I need a wedge. Hold on. Shim. That guy goes in there just to hold that aluminum. And then I can bring this against the aluminum, slide it this way, and it'll just catch right there. And then I don't use a marking knife. I use 0.3 millimeter lead. It is tiny, right? So tiny that it breaks half the time when you're marking wood. So I take advantage of that other half of the time. And that's it. We can make those cuts. We'll transfer those to the front because we won't be able to see the open side, the bigger side, and make the cuts. Awesome. So pulled this dude off. Took that blade off that had the 8-degree right hand, you know, all the teeth, right hand bevel. Put in a, this is called a flat grind. So every tooth is just flat. So that's gonna cut a nice flat bottom. And we need to change this to 8 degrees. Remember this dude? We can use this again. And let me pull this pin. Okay. I like putting a board right here. Let me see. 2584. 2584. I think that's good. Put that right against that. Bring this up to it. We can set our 8-degree angle right in there. Should be good. Check it here. That looks dead on. Okay, 8 degrees. Yeah. Then we can add this dude. This thing's getting a little chewed up, but as long as it has backup on this face, should be fine. And I use a scribe to mark rather than a, you know, what's traditional is to use a marking gauge to scribe a line. I don't scribe a line because these aren't hand cut, and I don't need that line there. And truthfully, I don't care for that line. It looks like a cross-grain scratch to me. Always has. Even when I hand cut dovetails, I would make my drawers or whatever it was slightly big and hand plane or use a belt sander to get those out. And these are going to be protruding dovetails like this box, right? So to me, that line going across there looks hideous. This looks much cleaner in my opinion, but hey, not everybody likes the color blue, right? So I just use simple scribe. I'll set it on something like this. This fence I know is 90 degrees. So I'm not tilting this at all since this is kind of narrow. And I can just put that there and mark that. So that'll give me my height. We have our 8 degrees this way. And then we'll set this up. We've got the pins marked, I think is on the other board. And I'll do a sample cut and make all these pins. Okay, I lied. You do need this because you need that reference to line up your pins, right? So double stick tape, just put another piece down there. You can mark this. Let's see, it's gonna be right in there. So we can establish the height. All right, this is going well. I've got board marked out, right? So these are my shims for the tails, and I can't use that one, so I made a new one here. But I can use this original one. So for the first cut, blocks in place, and I'll scoot that over to there. This guy will go in here, boom. Scoot it over again, make that cut. Of course, I'll cut both ends of both pieces, and then I can rotate this to 8 degrees the other direction and cut the rest of the pins, yeah? All right, check it out. So dovetails are almost always easier, well they are, they're always easier to do if you cut a rabbet on your tailboard. You know, just a little rabbet. That way it's easier to index, but sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. Another way you can do it is just clamp something onto the tailboard like this, and you can just take this outside and let the low raking light cascade across here, and you can just get this dead flush. So that, in a sense, is your rabbet. Then you have something to index at perfectly, right? And you can either make your mark. I already marked these, but it's another good way to check. So I can put this on here, I can get it flush with the edges, right? And take a strong light. I can shine it in through here, and I can see how accurate my cuts are if I need to make any adjustments. This looks perfect, so I'm gonna keep going.
And you'll note that this is the sample.
Okay, same thing. I've rotated this 8 degrees the other direction. And so now we can start to cut the rest of the pins. And now I can use that other shim, this extra one that I had made. I won't need it on this side, but that's one cut there, one cut there, and of course the first cut there. So as always, I'll start with the sample. And then of course all that's left is to nibble out the in-between there, right? That would go just like that. So I can hog all that other area out. That's gonna fit. It's so awesome. All right, so here's a sample, and in my haste, I wasn't holding the board tight to the stop, and I cut a little extra there, but this is why we make samples, and it's a little bit loose. So
To tighten things up,
I'm going to move this over just a little bit. So what I'm going to do, take a piece of, so I can take this stop and put it there, but first I'm going to put some tape on here. I should have cut 2 samples, I guess, but anyway, this should work. I don't know if 1 layer is enough. I'm going to go 2. 2 might be too much. I don't know. We'll see. So I'm going to put this here. Okay, then I can release that one, move the tape, put this back, and I've effectively scooted this over about 2/10 of a millimeter, right? Or 8 thousandths, 8.5 thousandths, 0.2 millimeters, 2/10. So that should tighten things up. Yeah, man, let's give that a go. All right, so it was a little tight. Instead of moving it over 2 pieces of tape, moved it over 1 piece. So it is a absolute perfect fit. Yeah, man. Table saw dovetails, quick, easy, accurate, extremely accurate.
so now that I'm happy with one and the fit, I can mark all the waste. The waste always needs marked, right? And then I can make all the cuts.
So by using stops, this would actually go either way. That's how accurate it is. But since we're trying to grain match, boom. Awesome, right? Matched, matched, matched. Yeah, man. I dig it.
I find it very satisfying when something has been cut accurately. Of course, this is just dry fit, but everything's nice and square. Boom, just like that. I can set it down and the tops are all nice and flush.
So I'm actually creating two different boxes, and on this box I sliced a little strip off the end. You can kind of see it sticking out there. Inserted magnets and then put that little strip back on. Once the magnets were in place, the strips were glued back on. I sanded everything flush. Then I cut the parts, all the parts, the same height and cut all the dovetails. And then this piece, I can recess a couple of magnets and that'll hold the lid in place. I have made a few mistakes gluing in magnets the wrong orientation, so I always like to check prior to, final assembly. Looks like this will work. Okay, this is kind of funny, and the first time I've ever done it, but it worked so well I thought I'd share. So I simply just used my honing guide and set each one of the box sides at a 45-degree angle, and then just drew that across 3 different grits of sandpaper to make absolutely perfect chamfers. Again, I'm not going into too much detail. I have videos on inlay and marquetry on my channel. Here's something kind of interesting. So I'm putting in this stem of the leaf or midrib, and I put it in 2 parts because it is so curved so that the grain direction isn't going at an angle here at the tip or here on this end. So I've got the first piece put in here, and the grain is kind of going this direction. And then I'll grab another piece and put it in with grain going kind of this direction and marry them by putting a long scarf joint. And it doesn't show up once you're done, but you can see this midrib was put in with 2 pieces, those 2 pieces there to make that. So 1, 2. Can't put it all in because of that curve unless I had, some of this canary wood that had curved grain, then you could do it. But anyway. Hey, check this out. So I'm getting ready to cut this lid, and it's, this piece of veneer with the marquetry on it moved a little bit when I glued it. No big deal. It's plenty oversized, but I don't have any square reference now since this is moved at a taper. No big shake. Every opportunity I get to use this Fritz Franz jig. This was made by my buddy David Bedrosian, and it is superb. Extremely well engineered, very accurate, and you put a lot of thought into making it with the stops. Not typical of your average Fritz and Franz jig, but this thing is awesome. So we've got these pieces here, and they're elongated so that I can loosen those and adjust these as the blade vibrates, or with use, these can get, chewed up, but they are 0 clearance. And I can move that right against the blade, and you can see it just whispers. I think you can see. Yeah, just contacting that blade, right? And so those are tight, those are adjusted. He even sends this wrench to keep those in place. Boom, and then a couple of magnets there. That's awesome. So I've got this laid out, in relation to a center on the logo, and I've got a line here that goes all the way across. And so I can put this here. I've set my stops already. I used a straight edge, and I can just see half of my line right there. So I know it's going to cut right dead on where I want to cut it. So then I can just take this handle, move it forward, squeeze everything down. I have this one locked down, but you really don't even have to lock it, but it doesn't hurt. And so we can make that cut. Oh. Please continue to hold. Right here I noticed that my blade guard was set a little bit low, but it squeezed through. These little grooved cowls worked excellent for clamping everything tight. Here you can see I've taken a couple of strips of canary wood, ripped them, and then added a strip of black veneer, just for some contrast.
All right, gluing up the edging around this lid, and sometimes it takes every tool in my arsenal. In other words, I dry clamped these in place, and these have the dominoes, small dominoes, 4mm dominoes, because this is end grain. And so I've clamped those in place, dry clamped. And instead of gluing these other two, I'm just gonna glue one. And I can just glue this for 5 minutes, release the clamps, that'll stay in place. And then I can glue the other side, wherever it is. There it is, right? And so I try to get everything ready. I even made a little holder for these clamps, so I can put that in my vise, end vise, hold that upright. That way I'm not struggling and juggling, trying to, put these clamps in place. Dry rag, wet rag, just in case. I didn't need it, but just want to get ready as much as possible. Strong light, and yeah.
Here I'm creating a thumbnail profile, and I've added tape to the outfeed side of this router table. Kind of acts like a joiner, right? So that 2 pieces of tape act as a small spacer to allow for the little bit of material that's been removed. Shooting boards are super fun to use. You can literally hear those few thousandths of an inch as that board scoots a little closer to the hand plane. Ah, how cool is that? So originally I planned on the magnets just holding the lid in place, but I decided to make this little piece, and that way it will index exactly where I want it. Just using some clamps and a spacer to hold it in place. And so all 4 edges of that little piece were chamfered, just so it'll ease onto the box a little bit easier. Everything is nice and square so the lid fits in either direction, and the magnets are going to be plenty strong. So here I'm cleaning up a couple of tiny little beads of glue, and I used a spacer to create the exact reveal of the bottom portion of this box. But it got stuck. So what's that little ramp for? So I could pull these stickers out like a blackjack dealer. This was a super fun project working with these beautiful species, and I showed this sticker box to my beautiful lady. She loved it so much. I told her it is yours when I bring it back from the IWF show. I hope you got something out of this video. Thanks a ton for watching. Remember to click, like, subscribe, learn.